In this episode, we begin with a practical introduction to Certified in Risk and Information Systems Control, CRISC, and why so many people in security, audit, governance, and technology leadership pay attention to it. For a brand new learner, the name can sound formal and a little intimidating, but the core idea is actually very straightforward. CRISC is about understanding how organizations identify risk, evaluate its meaning, and respond to it in a way that supports the business instead of slowing it down. That matters because modern organizations rely on technology for almost everything they do. And when technology is tied to customer data, money, operations, reputation, and legal obligations, weak risk decisions can cause very real damage. This certification sits at the intersection of business judgment and cybersecurity thinking, which makes it especially valuable for people who want to move beyond purely technical work and understand how security decisions are made at the organizational level. Rather than focusing on typing commands or configuring tools, it emphasizes reasoning, communication, governance, and control thinking. That is why this opening conversation matters, because before you study any domain in depth, you need to understand what kind of professional CRISC is designed to shape and why that role has become so important. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good way to understand CRISC is to picture an organization trying to move quickly while still avoiding expensive mistakes. The company wants to launch new products, serve customers, grow revenue, comply with regulations, and maintain trust, all while facing cyber threats, operational disruptions, vendor problems, and internal control weaknesses. A person with CRISC knowledge helps leaders make sound decisions in that environment by asking disciplined questions. What could go wrong? How likely is it? How serious would the impact be? What controls already exist? And where is the organization still exposed in ways leadership may not fully understand? That may sound like common sense, but in practice it requires structured thinking, consistent language, and an ability to connect technical realities to business priorities. Many people entering cybersecurity assume success always comes from deep technical specialization. Yet organizations also need professionals who can interpret risk and help management choose wisely. CRISC speaks directly to that need. It prepares learners to think about technology risk not as a separate silo, but as part of business performance, resilience, accountability, and long-term organizational health. When people first hear about cybersecurity certifications, they often expect every exam to center on attacks, malware, firewalls, or incident handling. CRISC is different in an important way because it does not treat security as only a technical battlefield. Instead, it frames security and control decisions through the lens of risk, which means it cares about uncertainty, business impact, acceptable exposure, governance, accountability, and the quality of decisions made by leaders and teams. That makes the certification especially useful for learners who want to understand why organizations choose one control over another, why some risks are accepted while others are reduced, and how management decisions shape security outcomes. A beginner sometimes assumes risk work is vague or abstract, but it is actually one of the most practical disciplines in the field. Risk decisions influence budgets, priorities, contracts, projects, staffing, compliance efforts, and operational safeguards. If a company misunderstands its risk, it may spend too little where protection is needed or too much where the return is weak. CRISC helps students understand that better security is not just about more tools. It is about making better, more defensible decisions in the face of uncertainty. The exam itself is best understood as a measurement of judgment across a defined body of knowledge rather than a memory contest built around isolated facts. A strong candidate is expected to recognize how governance supports risk management, how risk assessment helps an organization understand its exposure, how response choices are evaluated, and how monitoring helps leadership see whether controls and decisions are working over time. In practical terms, this means the exam tests whether you can think like someone who understands both organizational objectives and control realities. Questions often reward the answer that is most aligned with business purpose, structured governance, and sound risk reasoning instead of the answer that simply sounds the most technical. For new learners, that is a very important mindset shift. You are not preparing to act like the loudest expert in the room who always wants the strongest possible control regardless of cost or context. You are preparing to think like a disciplined professional who understands trade-offs, consequences, accountability, and alignment with organizational goals. That is one reason some learners find CRISC refreshing. It encourages mature judgment, and mature judgment is what organizations often need most when risk becomes complex. Another useful point for beginners is understanding who this certification is really for. The title might suggest it belongs only to senior specialists, but the knowledge behind it is relevant to several kinds of roles. People in governance, risk, and compliance work benefit from it because they deal directly with policy, control expectations, and organizational accountability. Security managers and aspiring leaders benefit because they must explain risk clearly to executives and help teams prioritize the right actions. Audit professionals benefit because they need to understand whether risk processes and controls are designed well and operating as intended. Technology managers, project leaders, consultants, and even business professionals who work closely with regulated or sensitive systems can also gain value because CRISC teaches a structured way to interpret exposure and control effectiveness. That does not mean every learner already has to be in a senior chair to appreciate it. A beginner can use the certification as a way to grow into that level of thinking. It can become a bridge from doing assigned tasks to understanding why the organization chose those tasks in the first place. To see why CRISC holds value, it helps to understand the difference between a task-based security perspective and a decision-based risk perspective. A task-based view often asks whether a control was installed, whether a scan was run, or whether a policy exists. Those questions matter, but by themselves they do not reveal whether the organization is actually managing its most important exposures well. A decision-based view asks whether leadership understands the right risks, whether the chosen response matches business needs, whether controls are reducing meaningful exposure, and whether the organization can explain its decisions with confidence. That is where CRISC becomes powerful. It trains the learner to connect risk identification, assessment, response, and monitoring into one continuous management process. Instead of treating security as a collection of isolated activities, it treats it as part of governance and business execution. This is especially important in environments where time, money, and attention are limited. Few organizations can do everything at once, so they must choose carefully. Professionals who understand CRISC principles can help those choices become more deliberate, more transparent, and more aligned with what the organization is actually trying to protect and achieve. One of the biggest benefits of earning CRISC is credibility, but it is worth being clear about what credibility means in this context. It does not mean a person suddenly becomes wise, strategic, or capable just because letters appear after a name. It means the certification can serve as a recognized signal that the holder has studied an established body of knowledge focused on technology risk and control decision-making. Employers often value that because hiring managers and leaders need ways to distinguish between candidates who only know security buzzwords and candidates who understand governance, risk reasoning, and organizational accountability. In many workplaces, technical teams and business leaders struggle to communicate because they use different language and prioritize different outcomes. Someone with CRISC training can often help close that gap by translating technical issues into business consequences and translating business priorities into practical control expectations. That ability is not flashy, but it is extremely valuable. Trust grows when a professional can explain why something matters, what the trade-offs are, and what response makes sense without exaggeration, panic, or confusion. For an individual learner, the career value of CRISC often shows up in the kind of conversations they are invited into over time. Early in a career, many people are asked to complete tasks that others have already defined. As their understanding matures, they begin participating in planning, prioritization, control design discussions, vendor evaluations, audit responses, and leadership briefings. CRISC supports that transition because it helps the learner build the language and perspective needed for higher-level decision environments. A person who understands risk is often more prepared to discuss business impact, control limitations, acceptable exposure, and governance expectations with confidence. That can open doors to roles involving risk analysis, control management, information security governance, audit coordination, compliance leadership, third-party risk, or broader management responsibilities. Even if a learner never carries the exact job title of risk manager, the thinking model still travels well across many functions. Organizations increasingly want people who can see beyond one tool or one team and understand the broader consequences of decisions. CRISC helps demonstrate readiness for that broader view, which is why it often supports movement into more influential and better compensated roles. Career opportunities connected to CRISC are wide enough to interest learners from different starting points. Some professionals use it to strengthen a path into risk and compliance leadership, where success depends on understanding control expectations, organizational exposure, and how management decisions are documented and monitored. Others use it to move from technical security roles into positions that require more communication with executives, auditors, regulators, or business managers. It can also support careers in internal audit, consulting, enterprise risk, vendor risk, operational resilience, and technology governance. What ties these paths together is not a single job title, but a common responsibility, helping organizations make better decisions under uncertainty. That is a very transferable capability. A hospital, bank, manufacturer, retailer, school, government office, and cloud service provider may look different on the surface, yet all of them must understand technology risk, control design, and the business consequences of failure. Because of that, CRISC knowledge is portable across industries. The learner is not just memorizing one company's process. The learner is building a framework for interpreting risk in many different organizational settings. It is also helpful to clear up a common misunderstanding that risk management is basically a softer version of security. That idea misses the point. Good risk management is not vague, timid, or secondary. It is a disciplined way to decide what matters most, where exposure is highest, which controls are worth the investment, and how to know whether the organization is improving. In some cases, the risk view actually demands harder thinking than a purely technical answer because it forces you to consider money, timing, accountability, operational impact, legal obligations, and strategic priorities all at once. For example, an organization might know that a technical improvement would reduce exposure, but it still must decide whether that improvement is affordable, whether it disrupts operations, whether the timing is realistic, and whether it addresses the most important risk first. CRISC trains learners to reason through those questions in a structured way. That is why professionals with this background are often useful in meetings where leaders must make choices, not just gather information. The ability to frame options clearly and tie them to business consequences is one of the quiet strengths of the certification. Another reason beginners should take this certification seriously is that it teaches habits of thought that remain useful even if your future role changes. Technologies evolve, product names change, and specific tools come and go, but the need to identify risk, understand impact, assess controls, communicate clearly, and monitor outcomes does not disappear. These are durable professional skills. A student who learns them early begins to see organizations differently. Policies stop looking like paperwork and start looking like governance signals. Control gaps stop looking like isolated mistakes and start looking like indicators of broader exposure. Business processes stop seeming separate from security and start appearing as the environments where security decisions must actually succeed. This shift in perspective is one of the real educational benefits of CRISC. It helps a learner move from simply noticing technical problems to understanding how those problems connect to accountability, management choices, and organizational resilience. That broader mental model often improves performance even before the certification is earned because it changes how the learner interprets daily work, asks questions, and communicates concerns. As you continue preparing, it is worth remembering that exams like this often reward disciplined reading more than dramatic insight. Many incorrect answers sound attractive because they appear strong, urgent, or highly technical, yet the better answer is usually the one that aligns with governance principles, business objectives, and structured risk management. For a beginner, that means studying is not only about absorbing terminology. It is about learning how the pieces fit together. Why does governance matter before risk decisions can be trusted? Why do defined roles matter before accountability becomes clear? Why do controls matter only when they address meaningful exposure? Why does monitoring matter after a response decision is made? CRISC is not just a label for knowing risk words. It reflects an integrated way of thinking. When learners understand that, the exam becomes less mysterious. Instead of facing a wall of disconnected concepts, they begin to see a single story about how organizations manage uncertainty in technology-driven environments. That mental coherence can reduce anxiety and make preparation more purposeful because every topic starts to connect with the others. There is also a human side to CRISC that new learners should not overlook. Risk work is deeply tied to communication, trust, and judgment. A professional may have accurate information, but if that information is not framed in a way leaders can understand and act on, the organization may still make poor choices. The person who can calmly explain exposure, likely impact, control strengths, and remaining uncertainty often becomes extremely valuable, especially during stressful moments. That is why CRISC is not only about analysis on paper. It is also about professional maturity. You are learning how to support decisions, how to respect business realities without ignoring security concerns, and how to think in a way that helps organizations function responsibly. For people who want long-term careers rather than short-term technical wins, that is a strong foundation. Many leaders rise not because they know the most obscure detail, but because they consistently help others understand complex situations and choose sensible actions. CRISC supports exactly that kind of contribution, which is one reason it continues to matter in modern cybersecurity and technology governance work. By the time you finish this course, the goal is not simply that the name CRISC sounds familiar. The goal is that you understand why it exists, what kind of thinking it represents, and how it can shape a meaningful professional path. This certification introduces a view of cybersecurity that is anchored in governance, business value, and intelligent control decisions rather than narrow technical activity alone. It can strengthen credibility, expand career options, improve communication with leadership, and help learners develop a more mature understanding of how organizations manage exposure over time. Just as important, it teaches that risk is not a side topic in cybersecurity. It is one of the central ways organizations decide what to protect, what to prioritize, and how to move forward responsibly. That makes CRISC a worthwhile pursuit for anyone who wants to understand the larger picture behind security decisions. As we move deeper into the material ahead, this foundation will make the rest of the journey far more coherent, because every future topic will connect back to the same central idea: helping organizations make better decisions when uncertainty, technology, and business consequences all meet.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.